Cloud. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the Advisory Neighborhood Commission 3C Environmental Justice Committee meeting. And we hold these meetings about once a month, and they are citizen-led, voluntary efforts to bring out issues and consider actions. The committee itself is not a decision-making body, but can make recommendations to the overall commission to take action. And it's really a forum for the community and neighbors to consider issues around environmental justice. And we've done some cool stuff in the past. I hope to do cool stuff in the future. We're excited tonight to have a program of experts to give us some insights into environmental justice. I am the chair of the commission. My name is Gawain Kripke. I live in Woodley Park. If everybody's cool with it, I'd like to just quickly go around the call and have everyone introduce yourself. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to hand it over to Heather, who will take us into the evening's program. And I'm going to, towards the end of the hour, I'm going to call the meeting back, and we'll do a little bit of committee business at the end, mainly just asking folks for ideas for other committee projects or ideas. So I've introduced myself. Just for convenience sake, maybe I'll call on people if you don't mind. Janelle, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Janelle Pagets. My single member district is 3C03. So the zoo and the larger buildings surrounding the zoo. I'm also the chair of ANC3C. I'm in my third term on the commission, so it's 2-year terms. So it's been a minute, but I'm glad that we are able to set up these committees to have these kinds of more robust discussions on topics of interest. So that's it.
Great, thanks. Adam, if you're still with us, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Adam. Sorry, I am on my way to the Caps game, so I will not be on camera. But I am the commissioner for 3CO2, which is the wardman and everything surrounding that. And I'm also the vice chair of ANC3C.
Great, thank you. Heather, I'll let you go last, since you're going to be doing it. I see Emily Vargas Barron. Do you want to introduce yourself? Maybe not. Madeline, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. And I'm on audio. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm a resident of Woodley Park. So Gawain is my commissioner, and I'm on that committee of environmental justice. And so thank you very much for this, for the participations of our panelists tonight, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Laura, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'm Laura Moore. I live in Cleveland Park, and I have been on the Environmental Justice Committee since its inception, and I too am very grateful for our panelists this evening. Thanks.
Great. Emily, I see you on the camera. Do you...
I emerge. Thank you so much. I'm just here to learn. I'm very, very interested and very committed to environmental issues, but I have a lot to learn about what are the prevailing biggest concerns that we have. And thank you very much for giving the opportunity to visit and see you all.
Great, welcome. Sarah Moore, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Moore. I'm a master's student at Vermont Law, and I'm a student of Professor Johnson. So I'm just here to listen and learn about local issues. I'm not in DC. I'm in Portland, Oregon. So thanks for having me.
Great. Maybe we'll let Heather. Should we let the panelists introduce themselves when you? I'm going to hand it over to Heather. Let her introduce herself and let her take it from there.
Sure. Thanks, Gawain. Yes, we'll get to our panelists in just one moment real quick. I'm Heather Goss. I am a resident of Cleveland Park, and I am also on the Environmental Justice Committee, and I'm going to moderate what I hope is a very interesting panel tonight. So I'm going to do just a super quick introduction just to the topic, and then turn it over for some introductions. Thanks everybody for joining us for this. Our conversation, obviously this evening, is going to be about environmental justice, and a little more specifically what it means for us in our own neighborhoods here in DC. We're going to hear about this in a little more depth from our panelist, but kind of at its simplest, environmental justice is really the idea that all people deserve equal protection from environmental harms and equal access to a healthy environment. We use those concepts of environmental justice to ensure that communities that are dealing with the effects of pollution and climate risk are able to be heard and represented in the policies that are meant to protect us. So to explore that more, we invited a really exciting panel whose work spans from environmental law to public health and community-driven solutions. Our goal tonight is to better understand, at least a little bit, some of the challenges that we face, how these concepts of environmental justice have worked in other scenarios, and how we as residents can take part in building what we like to say is a more just and resilient future here in DC. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to spend a minute or two kind of introducing themselves and their background. Lauren, why don't we start with you?
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Johnson. I currently reside in Ashburn, Virginia, and I'm from Bristol, Virginia. How I was invited to this call is that one of my star students, Sarah Moore, recommended me for this panel as she's related to Laura Moore. And I teach at Vermont Law in graduate school, which is how I met Sarah, and teach courses in environmental justice, structural equality, and DEI. But that's kind of my side job. My main job is at Environmental Defense Fund, where I'm a manager on their justice and equity team. So I know I'm calling in from Northern Virginia, but I went to graduate school at George Washington University and started the first environmental justice student organization and did volunteer work and advocacy awareness from there. So I'm happy to contribute that knowledge and other expertise I have in environmental justice.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Dorman, and I am currently based at Georgetown Law in the Environmental Law and Justice Clinic that we have here. In that capacity, I work with law students on environmental justice matters. So in support of communities that might be facing a variety of different environmental justice concerns, ranging from things like the impacts of climate change to co-location of polluting facilities near their neighborhoods, among other issues. I am really delighted to be here tonight, and I thank the Commission for the invitation. I am also a resident of Cleveland Park and have been there for several years now, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So thank you all for being here.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Sarah. And Lauren, we're going to get kicked off with, I think, our first question here, which is going to be a little broad, I think, but I'd love to know, and Lauren, maybe we'll start with you. How do you define environmental justice kind of more on the local scale with within cities and neighborhoods? And I wonder if maybe you could share an example of maybe some local level environmental issues where you've seen community members make a difference in that way.
For sure. So environmental justice at the neighborhood scale is about correcting decades of systemic harm, where some communities, especially Black and Brown neighborhoods, have been burdened by pollution, unsafe infrastructure, and a lack of investment, while others have access to clean air, green space, and resources to withstand climate threats. It's not just about environmental protection, it's about where we live and how that determines our health and longevity. We clearly see this in DC and how I-395 was routed through Black neighborhoods, displacing families and increasing air pollution in communities that already face disinvestment. It's the same story in Ivy City, where residents fought back against a proposed bus depot, and Buzzard Point, where industrial facilities were pushed into vulnerable communities without adequate safeguards. Beyond DC, we see similar issues outside of New Orleans, Louisiana. There's this one amazing community leader named Sharon Levine. She's from St. James Parish outside Louisiana, and she resides in Cancer Alley. So this is a stretch of 250 plus petrochemical plants along the Mississippi River, and we see cancer rates 6 times higher than the national average. And seeing that so many of her neighbors were dying from this pollution, she founded her own community-based organization called Rise St. James that was not developed out of want, but necessity, because she saw how much these environmental pollutions was affecting and killing her neighbors. And through her grassroots effort, she stopped a $1.25 billion plastics plant. And she's now organizing against a $9.4 billion expansion of that plant. And her story and covered the kind of battles that residents can lead and that they can also make a difference. And we've seen those efforts throughout DC, and it's really from that local grassroots level in collaboration with policymakers that we see that meaningful and authentic change.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren. I had to smile when you mentioned Sharon Levine. I was very lucky. I work for a scientific association, and we recruited her to speak at our conference last year, and it was incredible. I might have to find the video when we get to our Q&A section to share it with you all, because she's an inspiration for sure.
I love that.
Sarah, same question. I wonder if you could just sort of define it for us and maybe some examples that you've seen at the local level.
Absolutely. And I will just be co-signing much of what Lauren already said. But when I think about environmental justice, I do think very much about this idea that environmental risks and hazards are disproportionately affecting vulnerable groups and communities, including Indigenous peoples and communities of color in particular. And in my work, we often refer to a variety of different experts as well as community leaders and so forth. I did want to note in this context that the United Nations human rights experts have identified how the histories of slavery and structural racism and colonization have resulted not only in legacies of segregation, but also disproportionate exposure of those historically marginalized communities and communities of color to environmental harms. So in a nutshell, that is what I would think about when thinking about environmental justice. I really appreciated the examples that Lauren already lifted up as well of communities in Cancer Alley, as well as here in DC. Much of my background has been in supporting communities throughout Latin America, actually, who face similar issues of environmental justice. So I thought I would just raise an international example and then also a local example in this context. One community that I have had the honor and privilege of accompanying is an Indigenous community in Panama that has faced a number of different extractive projects, ranging from mining projects to energy development projects like hydroelectric dams, as well as transmission lines. And those have really cut into their ancestral lands, which lie on one of the last intact tropical forests in Panama. And unfortunately, they have not been adequately informed about the impacts of these projects before they go forward, nor have they been consulted and properly allowed to give their consent, as is their right as Indigenous peoples to do so. I think this really illustrates how those legacies of colonization and systemic racism do give rise to environmental injustices today. And that's something, like I mentioned, I wanted to raise an international example, but also a local example, because I think some of those patterns, while they have different manifestations, share some of those same roots. And so I was actually going to lift up the example that Lauren also already mentioned of Ward 5 and the communities of Brentwood and Ivy City in Ward 5 of Washington, D.C., where communities have been very much affected by the co-location of polluting facilities. In this area of D.C., the zoning practices historically have led to this area being, or having, excuse me, more than half of the industrially zoned land in Washington, D.C. in the district, which of course has really significant impacts for people's health, given the amount of emissions and other issues that community members face in this area. As well as Lauren mentioned very correctly, issues like the urban heat island effect, where temperatures are higher in this area of the city than in other areas of the city. And so I just wanted to tie those two examples, as different as they might seem, together again, just to underscore how I think those legacies of discrimination can very much give rise to disparate environmental impacts on people's lives, and also to underscore how communities at the local level are very much organizing and pushing back. So in both instances, community members have come together to preserve the spaces, the community spaces, such as in Washington, D.C., the Crummell School, and preserve those spaces and even turn them in some cases into spaces for community resilience to be built out. They have also pushed for changes through legislation and policy and so forth at the local level, and really organized through community meetings, lifting up local leadership of impacted community members, and speaking out, whether it's going to DC council hearings when issues are being debated that affect their rights and their well-being, or engaging in other spaces and outreach, which many organizations and community members in DC, but also in the case that I mentioned from Panama, are very actively doing.
Great, thank you, Sarah. My next question is, I think some of these answers are going to kind of bleed into one another. So feel free to go back to, examples you've already used, and if you have any more detail about them, that would be great too, or if you have new ones. But I wonder if maybe Lauren, going back to you, both of you are very, work in kind of the legal and policy space. And so I wonder if you could talk about what sort of legal strategies or policy changes that you've seen in your work in pursuing environmental justice, and maybe a little bit about how local communities can kind of ensure that they have that seat at the table when these laws or policies are being made. Oh, you're on mute.
Sad. I first would like to thank Sarah for the amazing work she's doing in DC. It just goes to show how working with students and being involved in the local community can really push change. And as she was exclaiming, we see similar issues, not entirely the same, but very similar issues abroad. And that just shows how environmental injustice, it's not accidental, it's systemic. It's the result of deliberate policy decisions like redlining, which segregated communities and tanked property values, which paved the way for the siting of highways, rail lines, and toxic facilities in Black neighborhoods. And in places like DC, you see similar things like in the Bronx, where they have elevated trains that pollute the surrounding area. And then you think of Manhattan, they have subways. All that pollution is not happening at the same level. And even in DC, where I mentioned the example of I-395, it was along that corridor that slave auctions happened in DC. So this just shows how it's just a continual progression of, racism and oppression in this country. So we really need to have that lens on and be anti-racist when we're addressing these issues, because they happen at that level. So what kind of legal strategies can help with this? Well, in my work at Environmental Defense Fund, we've been mandating the use of cumulative impact assessments in infrastructure and permitting processes. This is because environmental justice is not siloed. It involves public health, economic justice, housing, and more. And we recently applied this approach to a grant proposal in Philadelphia. I kind of do work all over. And in that grant proposal, we pushed for this one tool. I'm going to put in the chat if I can. I don't know if I can see, but actually, I don't know if I can put it in the general chat. But if you want to check out this one tool that EDF has produced, it's called the U.S. Climate Vulnerability Index. You just go to climatevulnerabilityindex.org. And as far as we know, it's the largest environmental justice screening and mapping tool out there that has 184 indicators that's able to show what is driving vulnerability at the neighborhood scale. And I was involved in the development and subsequently the dissemination and fundraising efforts for this tool. So with this tool, we are trying to combine it with community engagement to prioritize and mitigate the compounding stressors affecting neighborhoods. In this grant, Philadelphia, but it can be used all over. It's a nationally based tool up to the census tract level. And through those type of strategies, where we're pairing data with action, then we can recommend policy solutions. So another key solution is community benefit ordinances, where we can have local policies that require polluters or developers to reinvest in affected neighborhoods. And it's these kind of tools that put the power back in the hands of residents and shift environmental decision-making from top down to co-govern. And to truly have a seat at the table, we really need communities to be funded and empowered as equal partners, not just included as an afterthought. And that means paying community experts, supporting local organizations, and embedding friendly voices into city planning, zoning boards, and federal government making processes. So I'm just happy we're having this conversation at that level, and hope we can come up with some ideas to be more inclusive and figure out how we can target our action in the neighborhoods that need it the most.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. Yes, we are very happy as well that you were here to guide us a little bit. Also, I think if I'm understanding this correctly, I think if you put something in the chat, it's going to go to Janelle, and Janelle can actually sort of like DM it to everybody. So everybody's probably seeing that on there, but it looks like it's coming from one person. Is that right, Janelle?
I think that we said it so you guys can all chat. It might just be
Okay.
being a little fickle right now.
Okay.
But thank you.
Sarah, could you tell us a little bit about kind of legal strategies or policies that you've seen work, and how, folks at the local level can really get involved?
Yes, thank you for the question. And thank you, Lauren, already for your answer. I will just build on it to start off and say that I also think that cumulative impact assessment is such an important tool. That is something that we have also been looking at and advocating for in collaboration with affected communities. And I know, in case anyone's interested, just at the end of last year, at the federal level, the Environmental Protection Agency just put out a framework for cumulative impacts that we hope will go forward at some point in the future. I wanted to highlight a couple of different strategies, as well as to underscore some of the legal challenges and kind of the legal roots of some of these problems that Lauren already very rightly again pointed to, such as land use laws and zoning, as well as other discriminatory practices like redlining and so forth, that very much give rise to some of the environmental injustices that we see across the country today. I wanted to raise the idea and the strategy of using a number of different strategies all at once. So I do, being kind of situated in a law school, I feel I should mention that, of course, litigation can be a useful tool. Lauren was mentioning the folks down in Cancer Alley, and I know that litigation has been one important tool for communities in Cancer Alley to stop some of these polluting facilities and petrochemical facilities in that area. But also, I think legislation can be a really powerful tool as well at the local level in particular, or state level, as the case may be. Here in DC, I know there have been efforts by folks over in Ward 5 in Ivy City and so forth to use laws such as enabling eminent domain to remove certain polluting facilities that are particularly problematic in that area, and really pushing for the DC government to use some of that authority to address environmental injustices and environmental justice concerns in that area very directly. I also do really want to uplift and emphasize the importance of things like the use of peaceful protests. That is something that I've seen across the board as a way to just really show both widespread community support for a particular cause and really just kind of displaying how seriously people are taking different environmental justice causes and initiatives, but also to highlight the human rights and other concerns that might be at stake. So things like peaceful protests, but also petitions, meetings with decision makers, and other forms of kind of more traditional advocacy, I think are all also very important to build out kind of a successful, hopefully, strategy to address environmental injustices. I wanted to emphasize also the importance of working in coalitions. I think that can be tremendously powerful. I very much want to lift up also the importance of following local leadership, especially the leadership of directly affected community members. So thinking through things like what are their goals? What are the community's goals for addressing a particular environmental injustice that they might be facing? And I did want to raise the example from Ward 5 and from Ivy City, where the community has put forward a proposal for establishing a climate resiliency hub, or what's also termed a community resiliency hub in Ward 5, not only to strengthen the community's ability to respond to climate impacts, such as the growing heat waves that might be experienced, but also just to build community resilience and build community in and of itself. And I think building community and networks of mutual support can be a really powerful tool as well. And to the extent that people across the district and other organizations are able to support community-based initiatives, I think that is perhaps the most powerful way to be bringing about positive change in some of these areas.
That's really, really fascinating. Both of you have given us a bunch of wonderful examples already. So this may be a bit of a deeper dive into some of those, but I wonder if you could talk about maybe some specific examples that, like, real kind of practical ways that community members have gotten involved, and how you've seen that come about. You've talked about these Ward 5 examples and some other things. So I would love to hear just from you other examples, whether they're in DC or elsewhere, and kind of the, what is the mechanism for actually getting involved? Like, you're talking about the cumulative impact assessment, which is really interesting. And I'm wondering how residents kind of like get involved into that process. Lauren.
Well, like you said, Heather, Sarah already has provided so many wonderful examples. But at the root of them, it just shows residents to advocate for environmental justice is to organize locally and consistently. You mentioned these meetings are open, so this could be a start. Figure out ways to get more residents involved in these meetings and zoning hearings and permit reviews, and make sure that they're aware of their ward council members. I'm also happy if you'd like to connect further about the tool I mentioned, the U.S. Climate Vulnerability Index, because we're hoping it can be a tool for policy change, because it shows not just what's happening, but why in terms of climate vulnerability. And our goal in that process of using this tool is to tie lived experience to data to make it more salient. And whenever I do frontline advocacy or service, I see firsthand how community input reshapes project for the better when it was genuinely listened to. My boss at Environmental Defense Fund, her name is Dr. Margaret Brown. She says we always need to engage in radical listening. And in doing this practice, we recently had to slow down a grant project and shift our strategy entirely because a community partner with deep experience in the neighborhood we're applying the grant for and longstanding trust with the funder itself, he helped us reframe our goals around what mattered most to residents. And in that case, it was to have like a data portal and the ability to pinpoint cumulative impacts through data, and then have that become a framework for permitting decisions. And it's when we get those types of data in the hands of the people that need it the most, that kind of knowledge becomes irreplaceable. Besides the local level, state action is more important than ever because we see recent rollbacks, so much so at the federal level. There's now proposed 43% cut to clean energy programs. And because of this, we really need to have cities and neighborhoods take the lead. So this relies upon the theory of, like, I use this theory called critical theory in my work, which shows how people with lived experience have expertise in that area. So we see local residents, especially in Black communities, are the first to experience environmental harm, but they're often the last to receive support. So that's why we really need to build local coalitions with those types of communities and insist on public accountability so that we can truly have actions that affect communities that need it the most and have them have a say in that as well.
Thank you, Lauren. Sarah, did you have any more to add about that kind of direct involvement?
Sure. I can share a couple of resources and thoughts about ways to get involved or how to plug into existing initiatives and so forth, particularly here in DC. One thing I did want to mention is that there are so many environmental justice groups that are, of course, working here in DC. One, in case people are interested in getting to know some of these groups, and apologies, I know many of you may already be familiar. with some of the resources that I'm going to share. But and it looks like this link that I was going to share in the chat is just going to go to you, Janelle. Is Janelle still here? No.
I think Janelle, send it to me and I'll pass it on.
Wonderful, thank you. I was going to share just this link to a recording that happened a couple of months ago by a number of different groups here in DC that have come together in a DC Environmental Justice Coalition. And in that recording, they do share a number of different ways of getting involved. I do think it's worth, rather than reinventing the wheel, so to speak, there are so many groups, like I said, that are already doing really incredible work and that have a real need either for volunteers or other forms of support, that I think that can be a really exciting way to get involved, even at the very local level. Some of the other actions that I have taken, for example, with my students here who are law students, is the sort of thing like if community members from Ward 5 or other partners are going to testify, like at the DC Council in some of those hearings, one thing we have done is to go and attend and show support and solidarity, right? I already mentioned things like petitions. There are often things like petitions that can be signed around some of these even very local issues, as I'm sure many or all of you are aware. There's also a number of like organizing or local meetings to strategize and so forth that happen all of the time. And I did just want to uplift that as I was preparing for this conversation, I saw that there is actually going to be an opportunity coming up this coming Saturday to go to Ivy City and take an environmental justice tour of Ivy City. And so while I am not affiliated with the groups that are hosting that or the residents that are going to be hosting and leading that tour, I did want to just lift that up because it might be of interest in case anyone here wants to actually go over to Ward 5 and see some of these issues that we're talking about tonight. And I just shared a link to some information about that also in the chat. And then just to conclude some of my initial remarks here, I just wanted to share some kind of other resources in case people rather are interested in doing some more kind of background readings or so forth. One resource that I think has been very important to my work is looking to the international standards that exist around things like the recently recognized right to a healthy environment at the international level, and other reports and statements that international experts have put out. So I just thought that I would share one example of that here in the chat of a human rights expert who focuses on the right to a healthy environment. And I share that because both in my work domestically with communities facing environmental justice concerns, as well as internationally, like I mentioned, the communities from Panama earlier in the hour. One strategy that we have found to be successful in different contexts has been to really rely on some of those legal frameworks that exist at the international level and the international standards, and using that kind of universal language of human rights to make the arguments at, for example, the state level or even the more local level, and saying that there is a human right to a healthy environment and how are we going to implement that here? Or similarly, international standards say that people should have appropriate access to environmental information and be able to be involved in public participation and robust consultation processes and so forth. And so if those sorts of things are not readily forthcoming, there are different legal frameworks, including at the international level, that can be drawn upon to draw attention to those human rights concerns. I thought I would just share as well, just because these are resources that I often share with some of my students, but just in case they're of interest to others here to be looking into some of these topics around environmental justice that we're talking about, I find that one of the seminal kind of reports on environmental justice is, of course, the Toxic Waste and Race in the United States report. And there was another report that came out 20 years later that was a follow-up to that, that has some pretty surprising in some ways, not so surprising in other ways, but just really salient reminders about the state of environmental justice in the United States. So I thought I would share that report. And then if anyone is interested in in learning about environmental justice from an Indigenous perspective, I wanted to share also just a book recommendation, which is a book that maybe many of you have heard of or have read already, but just in case it's useful, I thought I would share Dina Gilio Whitaker's book called As Long as Grass Grows, because I do think that the Indigenous perspective on some of these environmental justice issues is really important to keep in mind as well. I'll leave it there for now, but we would be very happy to expand on any of that or answer any other questions going forward.
I'm so happy you brought up Dina's book, because when I was at GW with our environmental justice organization called Environmental Justice Action Network, we actually read that book together and invited Dina on to a webinar, and it was absolutely outstanding. Like, just the breadth of traditional ecological knowledge, Indigenous knowledge that is there, but we're not using to combat environmental issues is so unfair, but highly recommend reading that book to get a start at it.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I have so much to read and gather after this, which is exactly what I wanted. So thank you so much. I also did not know about that tour happening this weekend in Ivy City. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot of people here are going to be interested in that. Thank you both so much. I kind of want to open it up to Q&A now. So if anybody, any of our guests here have any questions for Lauren and Sarah, please chime in.
I don't have a question. I just want to maybe make some connections, if that's okay. So the Environmental Justice Committee that you're before tonight, you know, I think we've focused a lot on just providing a platform for information from our meetings. So we've hosted speakers that have crossed the gamut from addressing issues like island heat considerations within DC to waste management strategies within DC, and a host of other topics that we've covered. But I just feel so much richer from tonight. I feel like we have 3 years worth of meetings that you've just helped us think about of how to better provide platforms for information to inform. Because I think, you know, my observation or experience is that a lot of times the communities don't connect the dots between cause and effect. And so that gap of information and understanding is, in many instances, holding people back from actually galvanizing or, you know, demanding something to change. So anyway, I just appreciate so much everything you guys brought to the table tonight. It's been very, very interesting to listen to. So thank you.
Agreed.
Hey, can I? Oh,
Madeline, why don't you go and then Gawain?
okay. Yeah, good. Thanks. I should have raised my hand. Sorry, guys. I just, yeah, same things just Laura said. This is like you go beyond of my expectations in terms of informations and you know, sort of the richness of informations and you know, aspects to look at and all that. And I think so, you know, like you know, I was trying to, I just noted the questions, but you know, to ask you guys, but you've already touched that. But I think if you could accompany us a little further to be a little bit more practical going forward, I think it would be really useful. You know, like what I wanted to ask you is like, what do you think the committee like ours, like this EG committee in Ward 3, you know, can do, should do? How can we get people more involved and you know, sort of participate in some of the issues at, you know, at the local level, at the city level and all that. So, I mean, both of you and Sarah, because you're very much involved, you really touched on that, but to the extent that you could help us move forward and being a little bit more impactful, I think that would be most welcome. I think, if I don't want to speak on behalf of all the committee, but I think that's, and bringing also some of the constituents to be more involved, to be more interested, to you know, sort of, anyway. So to the extent that would be really welcome. So thank you again for all this richness of information you provided tonight.
I'd like
can-
to say a couple of things, if I may. I wanted to congratulate our two highly articulate and knowledgeable speakers. You were superb, and I was really excited to know that Sarah also has the international aspect, which there's a lot to learn internationally, and also a lot to learn from Indigenous groups. So that those points were very important. I was wondering to what degree you have focused within Washington, D.C. on water quality and water testing. There is a group that works on that, of course, but I think it would be important to look at the dimension of water and how pollutants are getting through to it. Someone else also mentioned issues of are we really recycling well? Is our work in separation adequate of different items? So I think those are very, very important additional points. And then I also feel like Madeleine in that what can we do as a group from here in Ward 3 of all places to be really, really helpful to you as you move forward? And that's a question, if you could think about that deeply, because a lot of us would like to see something happen in that way to assist. There's nothing more appalling to me, and I worked in one of the areas of great negative impact in East Austin, Texas for a long time, and was appalled at what had occurred there. So the very thought, and somehow it's always to the east of the city. It has to do with prevailing winds, but it's so wrong. And I feel that it's everybody's responsibility. So we should do our very best to be supportive of you and what you're doing. I think the two of you are great leaders for this. What we need is probably really guidance on how to be best helpful, and then bring in some other people, because your presentation should have been to hundreds, not just a few of us. So thank you for your presentations.
Lauren, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Emily, for the wonderful points you brought up. Yes, tends to be the east of a city that we see the worst environmental impacts. I believe that's why we see that in Ward 8. And I can just bring some background I had. Like I said, I was at GW and started our first environmental justice organization. And because we learned of, prevailing winds and all the pollution accumulating there in DC, we focused much of our work on Ward 8. And Ward 8 actually has the most green spaces of any ward in DC, but there's a stark disparity in how it's cared for. Like we see Rock Creek Park, located in a wealthier and wider part of the city, is consistently maintained and restored, but we saw parks in Ward 8 under the same National Park Service management was plagued by trash, overrun with invasive vegetation, and was unsafe for residents. And we see a huge association between like the quality of green space and environmental health, or even just crime levels. If you have a cleaner environment, then you have a safer environment. And like you also pointed out, Emily, like this has a huge effect on our local waterways. So when I was at GW, we actually worked with Ward 8 Woods that does park cleanups in Ward 8 of DC and Anacostia Riverkeeper, where we were testing local streams, a lot of which were not even mapped out, but they were still present, specifically from the Anacostia River, which recently became clean enough to swim in. So that also just shows how beforehand it wasn't the case. And there are so many brownfield sites located along that river. So we really need to turn on that lens of like, what are the disparities that take place in DC? Where are the visible pollution, the degraded habitats, and why is that happening? Because all of these issues, they're not isolated. They're the result of a system that prioritizes the maintenance and resources in some neighborhoods while ignoring the rest.
Right. My daughter has done a lot of river water testing. She did it as an enjoyable adjunct to her early education. And she's continued, and then she does water testing in Rock Creek. And you can't believe the pollutants there. It's really very heavy, but that's the invisible aspect. The water, you don't see it. You have to test it to see what's there. So the problem is citywide in a sense, but it's worse, far worse in the Anacostia River. And the cleanups there, people say to me, "You look at how it's improved," and I look and I see nothing but still trash and you know, dead birds and all sorts of things that are not good to have in the waterways. So I strongly believe that this should be a citywide effort, and we should have all the boards helping out to ensure that we have a completely environmentally secure city.
Thanks, Emily. I'm going to jump in real quick. Gawain, I know you had your hand up earlier, and I think I'm just going to kind of turn it back over to you because I know we have some committee things, but if you had any other comments, you can give those as well. I do want to thank Lauren and Sarah for joining us. I think this was a really super interesting panel. Like, I forget if it was Laura Madeline who said, I think you've given us topics for, you know, the next few years and a lot of things to do. So I just want to thank you so much. I appreciate you spending the last hour with us. And Gawain, I'm going to hand it back over to your fearless leadership.
Great, thanks. Well, I did have one comment on which it echoes some other people, but as a resident here of Woodley Park, I feel really blessed and privileged by our environment. I feel like we have access to a lot of really great environmental assets. Both number one is just our access to nature, the conservancies and the Rock Creek and the park and so forth. And so in a lot of ways, my primary motivation is sort of environmental protection and maintaining the assets we have and so forth. But I don't want to let go of sort of the justice dimension to it. And I think this element is mostly is more about us acting in solidarity, because I think we have a lot here, and it's more about how can we use our advantages and so forth to bring others into a better situation. So in terms of an action agenda and so forth, I've been wrestling with that a bit. Like, what is it we should be doing or prioritizing from where we sit? Number one, to protect what we have, but also to help others in their sort of justice fights around the environment. So that's sort of a framing, and I want to offer or like invite ideas from anyone on that. And there's a couple that have come up here. I love this Ivy City environmental tour, is really cool. I want to see if we can link up with that. But if there are any other ideas like that, I think would be really welcome. Let me stop there, but then I want to do a tiny bit of commission or committee business at the end. Stop there for any final comments from the panelists.
I'll just jump in very briefly and say that I would echo the idea of working in solidarity kind of across wards, or given kind of some of my past international work as well, across country lines, because some of these issues are remarkably, as Lauren said, not the same, but like remarkably similar in some ways. So I do think, again, starting conversations, or maybe you are all already having many conversations and I'm just not aware. But I think having conversations kind of across boards would be a really powerful thing. I do think that there's often legislation like about environmental justice issues at the DC level that we could be jointly supporting, right? If we agree on it. I was going to share, this is from a couple of years ago, but there was an environmental justice bill that was seeking to address some of the issues in Ward 5 specifically. And so if there were legislation like that, then that would be a really clear way of, you know, attending hearings or just being supportive on really concrete measures in DC, I think. And then also to kind of the international point and to the very, I think, well-stated point about those of us who are sitting in a position of privilege and advantage. Just being in DC offers so many possibilities. There are, I mean, speaking from my past work, we often did work around what projects the World Bank, for example, was funding internationally and so forth. And there were often public protests that were happening around those sorts of things. And so if that speaks to anyone here or anyone watching, linking up with organizations that are doing that kind of work in DC, and just even, I mean, it sounds simple, right? But being on their mailing list to know when certain actions like that are happening, whether it's signing on to letters or joining protests or whatever the case might be, I think that can be a really powerful way to engage and be supportive. Again, both across kind of ward lines, but also beyond that as well. So thank you again for the conversation and for the questions. I appreciate it.
And I'll just
Lauren?
add, just thank you for having me here. I'm just grateful to see just how your committee is thinking about these issues because they're so urgent. And if you just see any areas to collaborate with an environmental nonprofit like EDF or that tool I mentioned, then I'm happy to stay involved. So thank you.
Okay, great. The thank you so much to the panel. I'm really grateful for your insight and for and just taking space to talk about this and think about this with us. We're just neighbors who are coming together and trying to think about these things, but it's fun and interesting for us. The committee visit. This is a public meeting, and so I want to just take a moment to invite members of the public who are here or who might listen in the future to get involved with the Environmental Justice Committee. We do have official committee members who are from the community. You don't have to be a ANC commissioner to be on the committee or to lead projects and ideas on the committee. And so we welcome it. We have community members here with us tonight who are on the committee. And if there's anyone who's interested in joining who hasn't yet joined, please do. We're also interested in getting community input on what agenda items or actions that the committee should do. So we come up with ideas, each month, trying to come up with things that are interesting to us or problems and challenges. But again, I want to open that to anyone who's interested. Please think of us as a resource and also as a forum to elevate issues in the community and to bring them also to the commission, which doesn't have much actual power, but has some influence in the city with both the politicians and with the city bureaucracies, and is often able. So if you have a problem, come to us, and or an idea, come to us, and we welcome picking up and championing others issues. Okay, that's it. And I do want to open it now for any kind of comments on the committee agenda, things we should focus on. Let's take our last few minutes to do that. Recommendations, ideas. This isn't your last chance. You can email us or suggest things. But our usual meetings are second Tuesday of a month, although it's variable depending on scheduling a little bit. And there is an ANC mailing list. If you go to ANC, sign up for the mailing list, and you'll get notifications for our meetings from that. Okay, I think that's it. Any final comments from anyone else before I close up?
I would like to make a suggestion. The two speakers were superb, and I think is it possible to arrange a community meeting at Cleveland Park Library, for example, and then invite in the whole community? I think you would get a whole bunch of people who would be very interested in this, and that I think once people are really informed of what the situation is, perhaps with a little bit more granular detail with regard to what's going on in Ivy City and Ward 5, that would be great. And try to bring communities together around common concerns. I think that would be really wonderful. I think there are a lot more than just this number of us who are concerned.
For sure.
Great, thanks for that. Definitely, we'll think on that and see if we can think of a bigger and more public event. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have yourself a great Tuesday, rest of the evening. Enjoy the weather. I think it's supposed to get worse later this week, so get outside. And thanks to our panelists and to the committee members.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank
Thank you very
you.